Okay, can you see my screen?
Absolutely. Here we go. I can perfectly see your screen, and I guess the other participants also. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so good morning, everybody who's in the, I guess, US time zone, and good afternoon to everybody else, so wherever you are in the world. My name is Dushani Palliyaguru, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Health Surveil. I want to first thank Gabriel for giving me this opportunity, and also IKARE AI for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of the work that I've done in the past and also my expertise in this area. So today I'm going to talk to you about nutrition, supplements, and other small molecules that can be used for healthy aging. So I'm a scientist by training, so I'm going to talk a little bit about scientific evidence and work that has been done by me and others in this area. But I'm also going to try to give you some practical tips, things that I have learned along the way, and things that I try to sort of tell people who I advise and talk to in my line of work about how to go about utilizing nutrition and supplements and other small molecules to improve your health as you get older. So here's a small outline of what I'm going to talk to you about. Today, I'm going to introduce, first of all, a few topics. The first one, healthy aging. Of course, I guess this audience doesn't really need an introduction to. And the second is nutrition, supplements, and other small molecules. I'm going to first speak about the definitions and how exactly these concepts come together within the context of what we're going to talk about today. A lot of my talk is going to be focused on NRF2 activators for healthy aging. I have a couple of reasons for doing this. A, because this is the area that I have very closely worked in the past. I have a deep interest in this in my current work as well. And the other thing is, I think this is a new and upcoming area within the context of nutrients and also supplements and other small molecules for aging, healthy aging, and anti-aging as well. So I'm going to talk about three compounds that are currently very exciting: astaxanthins, sulforaphane, and withafrin A. And then last, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we need to look for, and we'll open up the floor for discussion. So what is healthy aging? I like to think of healthy aging as the combination of multiple different aspects. So we often think about aging from the perspective of absence of disease or well-controlled disease. This is, of course, sort of the traditional way of looking at health and also aging. And this comes together with physical health. And the other important thing we have to think about as we get older is functional health. And functional health really means that as we get older, we tend to accumulate functional deficit. For example, our gait becomes slower. We're not able to, function. We don't have as much strength. We become frail. So there's also aspects that we need to think about that's related to functional aging when you think of healthy aging as a whole. And the last but not least, we also need to think about mental health. We know that aging is associated with cognitive decline and other sorts of neurodegenerative conditions. So we also need to think about how we can keep our mental well-being intact as we get older. One aspect I want to touch upon in terms of what happens as we get older is metabolism and how metabolic trajectories change as we get older. And this is work that I did when I was a postdoc at the National Institute on Aging Intramural Research Program. This work was published in Cell Metabolism in 2021. So in this study, what we did was we looked at multiple different species, but here I'm showing you data for humans, for healthy humans. Longitudinal data, we looked at glucose, so fasting blood glucose levels, body weights, and waist circumference, which is a surrogate marker for body fatness. So what we saw was that as people got older, right about when you start to define people as being of old age, around 65 years old, fasting blood glucose up until that point tends to go up and then starts to stabilize a little bit. With body weight, we see these levels going up and then reducing, but that happens in your 50s. And then with waist circumference, what you see is also something similar. These levels go up until you're about 65, and then generally stabilize. So the point of showing this to you is really to show that, as healthy individuals. So these are healthy individuals recruited from the Washington, Baltimore area. What we see is that there is a healthy trajectory or a normal trajectory of aging that these metabolic indices follow as we get older. Being able to identify where you stand in a graph like this is important, because then you can sort of think about interventions to bring those levels either up or down to a healthy range. And those things can be done by lifestyle interventions such as nutrition, and also other interventions that are very exciting right now, and there's a lot of research happening around. So this brings me to nutrition, supplements, and other small molecules. By definition, nutrition is the process of taking in food and converting it into energy and other components required for life and health. And this includes also micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, phytonutrients. These are small molecules that are present in plants mostly, and also other food items that can be beneficial for your health, and other diet-based molecules. Supplements, on the other hand, are components that are intended to add or supplement a person's standard nutrition for improved health. This is in particular useful for people with nutrient deficiencies, special needs, or generally people who like to, add a little bit of additional supplementation to their health. People like to try out different things because there are so many supplements out there. So we see a lot of usage in that group as well. How do these concepts come together, right? Nutrition, supplements, and aging, how exactly are they related? We know that research shows that eating a balanced diet consisting of fruits, vegetables, lean protein, in other words, diets like the Mediterranean diet, is actually associated with health benefits in aging populations. Actually, not just in aging populations, but in the general population as well. So if you think of aging as a trajectory that happens from the time you're born, so when you're a child to your adolescence to when you're in your 20s and 30s and beyond, there are a variety of different changes that your body goes through. This also means that these changes, the nutritional needs change along the lifespan as you get older and go through life. And the benefits that you get from eating a balanced diet could be different at each life stage as well. So, for example, older adults develop a lot of dental issues and sensory issues that can lead to poor nutrition. So we know that due to dental issues, older adults might have problems chewing food. Therefore, they might stop eating in some cases. This could be highly problematic for nutrition, could even lead to malnutrition in some cases. They also have sensory issues, so they might not be able to taste food as much as when they were younger. So these can also lead to a lot of issues. Older adults also have malabsorption in some cases in their intestines, leading to malnutrition in some cases. So, things that we took for granted when you're younger might be very different as you get older. So the point I'm trying to make is through your life course, you have different changes that your body goes through, and your nutritional changes and your nutritional needs also change along those. Essential nutrient deficiencies play a key role in aging-related diseases. This is, for example, we know that vitamin B12 deficiency is linked with anemia, dementia, cognitive decline in older adults. This has been shown in multiple different studies. Supplementation in this case can definitely help. But the point we need to remember is that some deficiencies that we see in society, that we see in our populations, is not even well characterized. So we know that there are some deficiencies that happen as we get older. through our lifespan, but we don't even fully understand what those are. And because we don't understand what those changes are, we don't really fully understand whether we could even supplement them, and if we can supplement it, what sort of supplementation we need to, get into. So hopefully, with future research, we'll know more about some of these pathways that naturally decline with age, or change with age, and so on. So this brings me to NRF2 activators for healthy aging. So the question many of you might be wondering is, what exactly is NRF2? So for folks who are not very familiar, NRF2 is a master transcriptional regulation of the environmental stress response. So I'm going to be a little technical, but what I want to really highlight here is the fact that NRF2 is sort of a sensor that's able to speak to the environment, and to your cells or your biology at the same time. So think of it as it's reading cues from the environment and then taking information from your environment and adjusting biological responses accordingly. Okay. So what exactly does this? So I borrowed this diagram from a very nice review that was published in 2018 by Masi Yamamoto and group. So under normal conditions, you get NRF2 bound to a complex that also consists of the main known repressor of NRF2, KEAP1, and many other components as well. So under normal conditions, under no stress conditions, NRF2 is degraded through the proteasomal pathway. However, when there are stresses present, for example, if there are electrophilic stresses or oxidative stresses, then there's a structural change that happens in this complex that allows for NRF2 to be released and accumulate in the cytoplasm of the cell. And when this accumulation happens, NRF2 is a transcription factor, so it's able to translocate into the nucleus and bind to these antioxidant response elements that's found upstream of these cytoprotective genes, thereby activating these cytoprotective genes. And these genes are very crucial in a variety of different pathways for good optimal health, like glutathione synthesis, ROS elimination, or reactive oxygen species elimination, detoxification, and drug excretion. So in other words, it gives rise to the activation of a battery of proteins or genes that turn into proteins later, that's responsible for protecting the cells, detoxifying certain chemicals and xenobiotics, and also protecting against inflammation. And some of these examples are glutathione esteransferases, NQO1, and hemoxygenases, and many others as well. So there are many activators of NRF2. So I talked about oxidative stress that can activate NRF2, but there are many others as well. So pharmacologic activators such as CDDO-IM and CDDO-ME or dimethyl fumarate have been shown to be potent activators of NRF2. But what's really exciting to a lot of us in the field, and I guess to this talk as well, is relevant, is the fact that nutritional phytochemicals can really activate the NRF2 pathway as well. And this has been known for many years. So some of these activators are astaxanthin, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about and sulforaphane, curcumin. So sulforaphane, I'm going to talk about, so I'm not going to mention much about it, but curcumin is actually the active component of turmeric, which is a compound that's used quite ubiquitously in Indian and South Asian cooking. So for example, if you make curry, you will end up using turmeric. So curcumin is the active ingredient in that. With Withafrin A also, I'm going to talk to you about, so I'm not going to touch upon it right now. Resveratrol has been a very exciting compound within the field of aging for many years. In the early 2000s, there were many papers that talked about resveratrol for anti-aging benefits. However, unfortunately, I think with time, that excitement has died down because we haven't been able to see conclusive evidence that resveratrol does in fact support anti-aging in the conditions that we thought it initially did. ECGC is the active component of green tea extracts. Cinnamaldehyde is the active component of cinnamon. So there are many others, but for the sake of time, I haven't been able to touch upon this. But if anybody has any questions, wants to talk about more, I'd be happy to indulge in a conversation later. So astaxanthin is a naturally occurring keto-carotenoid. So you might recognize some of these. It's actually a pigment that gives certain plants and organisms a distinct pink color. So you find this in algae, salmon, krill, trout, and other types of these pinkish, reddish food items. We have seen some exciting evidence for lifespan extension in male mice in the ITP study. So for those of you who are not familiar with the ITP study, what it is, it's considered to be the gold standard for preclinical studies for lifespan effects in mice. It's funded by the National Institute on Aging. It's a multi-site study, meaning it's the same study design is conducted at multiple different institutions. So through an extensive process, individuals can propose certain compounds, and then once the compound is approved, then they will end up, providing those compounds to mice in this case, and then the mice will be observed for a certain period of time to understand whether there will be lifespan extension benefits in these mice by being supplemented or being administered this particular compound. So when this was given to animals in the ITP study at a dose of 4,000 ppm, astaxanthin actually extended median lifespan in this study. So you see, asta is shown in the green line. You see that it's actually doing so much better than the control animals. And this was for the UT site, but overall, they did see this at other sites as well. So this is in mice. Then the question becomes, what about evidence for lifespan and health span extension in humans? Human studies are a lot more extensive to do, and one might argue that doing a supplementation study is going to be very messy. So there's not a lot of evidence in humans, but what we do know is that there are some known benefits for astaxanthin providing benefits against aging-associated disease. So this example shows how HbA1c levels was actually reduced in pre-diabetics after a 12-week period of on 12 milligrams of astaxanthin. So here's what happens in the astaxanthin group. There was an N of 16 pre-diabetics in this. There was a statistically significant reduction in HbA1c levels compared to the placebo group. So there's some evidence, but of course we have to, see more evidence and see how exactly these unfold for healthy aging in the coming years, hopefully within the context of astaxanthin. The next compound is sulforaphane. Many of you may not have heard of it. Some of you may have heard of it. So sulforaphane is a naturally occurring isothiocyanate. It's derived from cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. So there are many isothiocyanates, not just sulforaphane. So, for example, what this shows, it's work that was that I did in 2018. Here I show isothiocyanate isolated from broccoli, as well as isothiocyanate isolated from watercress, another type of cruciferous vegetable. So sulforaphane is from broccoli, and phenethyl isothiocyanate, or PEITC, is from watercress. So what happens is these isothiocyanates don't exist in the plant, but they have a precursor called glucosinolates. So there are two types of glucosinolates in these different plants. So when the plant cell wall is damaged due to cutting, chopping, chewing, or whatever, this glucosinolate molecule comes into contact with an enzyme that's found in the plant called myrosinase. And this enzymatic reaction gives rise to the production of the isothiocyanate. In the case of broccoli, it's sulforaphane. In the case of watercress, it's phenylethyl isothiocyanate. So these compounds actually have been shown to have great benefit in multiple different clinical trials. And you might recognize that some of them are actually aging related and associated with aging, suggesting that perhaps there's quite a lot of benefit for using these compounds in against aging associated conditions. What about direct evidence? So there are some studies in smaller organisms that show benefit. So sulforaphane increased lifespan in C. elegans or worms at doses that were higher than 75 micromolar. This was a study published in 2021. So you can see the lifespan curves here. The sulforaphane C. elegans or worms actually show a better median lifespan. Unfortunately, there's no conclusive lifespan studies in mammals, in part due to the unstable nature of these isothiocyanate molecules. So it's very difficult to do with an unstable molecule like this. It's difficult to do studies with mammals because you have to typically incorporate it into the diet when you do these lifespan studies with mice, for example. And it hasn't been, it's a little difficult to do with an unstable compound. However, right now there are a lot of technological advances happening in this space, trying to stabilize the molecule by using a variety of different methodologies. So hopefully in the future, we might see more studies looking at sulforaphane or stabilized versions of sulforaphane and the effects on lifespan and health span in mammalian models as well. So in humans, there's some evidence suggesting that it could be actually beneficial. And that this evidence is, I think, also mounting very fast. In this study in 2021, there was a study showed that the processing speed and working memory in older adults improved after a 12-week period of 30 milligrams of glucoraphanin. Now, glucoraphanin, remember, is the the precursor glucosinolate that's found in broccoli. So when you give this precursor molecule, presumably sulforaphane is made, which gives rise to this improvements in cognition. In a study in 2018, I was actually looked at data that was collected from a study that was done in Shidong, China, and we showed that increased detoxification of environmental toxins after the consumption of sulforaphane and derivatives. So in this study, what we actually showed was that in people who were cigarette smokers and people who were exposed to just ambient air pollution, the amount of benzene N-acetylcysteine. So that's it's a metabolite of a pollutant. So these are all pollutants: benzene, acrolein, and protonaldehyde. So we measured urinary levels of metabolites of each of these pollutants in these people who were taking in these interventions. And what we saw was that in people who were taking in glucoraphanin and sulforaphane, or glucoraphanin or PEITC, the other type of isothiocyanate I was talking about, they were able to sort of detoxify these environmental chemicals after the intervention compared to where they were before. So why is this relevant to aging? We know that as we get older, we become more susceptible to environmental pollutants. In fact, this is one of the groups that we hear about. When there are high air pollution days, we often hear about susceptible groups that need to sort of stay indoors and really take care of yourselves. It's usually pregnant women, young children, or older adults. So that's really because as we get older, we lose some of these resilient mechanisms and these detoxification pathways. So having a way through a dietary means to protect ourselves against environmental chemicals and environmental pollutants could potentially be very beneficial for upholding the health of older adults. So this is work that hopefully will be able to grow as we move forward. So this brings me to withafrin A. It's a steroidal lactone present in Withania somnifera, or plant, also known as ashwagandha, which is used in traditional South Asian medicine. It has been used for millennia as an energy enhancer, a fertility booster, and so on. And these compounds, actually, all three of the ones that I'm talking about are currently available over the counter as supplements in the market. So in this work that I did in 2016, so this is actually my doctoral dissertation, what I showed was that Vithafrin A, the bioactive component of Withania somnifera, activated NRF2 through a non-canonical pathway. So not through the KEAP1 pathway that I talked about earlier, but through a different pathway that was mediated by PI3 kinase. And by activating NRF2, it was able to protect against drug-induced hepatotoxicity, meaning it was able to prevent liver damage from happening that was due to drugs like acetaminophen. So with data that has accumulated since and also before, we know that it's not just prevention of these liver damage associated effects, but we also know that Vithafrin A has potent effects against diseases that are related to aging, like certain types of cancer, dementia, and heart disease as well. What about lifespan extension? In smaller organisms, this study has been done. For example, this study showed, that was published in 2021, there was lifespan extension in fruit flies at a concentration of 10 and 100 micromolar of Vithafrin A. So you see that there's an increase in the median lifespan as well as the maximum lifespan with Vithafrin A. In humans, ashwagandha supplementation, so not Vithafrin A, but the plant component, the extract itself, it has been shown to improve cognitive outcomes related to word recall, picture recognition, and so on. So what you see here is data from that. So this is day 0, and this is day 30 of the intervention. What you see is that, and data related to correct attempts, recalled attempts, and so on between the placebo group and the ashwagandha group. So this is the plant compound, the parent plant compound. So you see that there are some interesting improvements that were seen in these cognitive outcomes. So this is actually a study that we're putting together. It's a review article. We're compiling evidence from the literature, looking at nutritional interventions for cognitive decline. This, we believe, is important because we know that cognitive decline is a major deficit that happens in many older adults as they get older. So there's a lot of evidence out there suggesting that nutrition can be an effective, also cost-effective intervention for cognitive decline. So we are compiling this evidence, and I just wanted to show you a snippet of, this is like 5% of all of the data that's out there. So a lot of the different types of diets, like the MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, have some encouraging benefits against cognitive decline and related outcomes. There's also fish oil supplementation, omega-3 supplementation, ketogenic diet, also certain types of small molecules like folic acid and selenium, and many others as well. So there are a lot of there's a lot of work that has been out there. So we wanted to sort of bring that evidence together to show that improved cognition is possible by using nutritional interventions. So I want to spend the next few minutes talking about, so we've talked about the scientific aspects, gotten a little deeper into the technicalities, but really at the end of the day, we know that, many of us use supplements, even if it's a multivitamin, then some of us like to, try different other things. What are some of the things that we want to pay attention to if we do want to consider nutrition supplements and other small molecules for improved aging or healthy aging? When it comes to nutrition, there are a few things that we need to look at. We know that nutrition is a very complex study area for obvious reasons, but we have to sort of go by some guidelines. So I think the trying to adhere to a diet or dietary components that are that have least amount of processing is important. Also, the least amount of derivatives and additives and preservatives is also critically important. It's good to have diverse ingredients that you know. This is one of the, I would say, the drawbacks of eating outside, going to a restaurant, because you don't really know what's in that unless you can see the ingredients themselves in front of you. So eating a lot of ingredients is okay, but you also need to know what those ingredients are. Natural doesn't mean better or safe. Generally, I like to say that out loud. However, in the case of nutrition, it really is. Why? Because if it is natural, if it's less processed, you really know what exactly you're eating. You have an identity for the food that you're eating, which I think is very important. It's also important to think of it in terms of a balancing act. So not too much or not too little. You don't want to get into diet unless you are on a very specific regimen. Eating too much of something or eating too little of something could be problematic. So again, I encourage you to go back to guidelines, speak to your doctor, speak to your dietitian if you have one, about these things if you're in doubt. The most important thing is to think about how you can personalize it, right? So many people go on certain diets without really knowing what their baseline nutrient status is, or not knowing what your needs are nutritionally. And like I said, as you get older through your lifespan, your nutritional needs change. So it's very important to know what those needs are before you go on a diet. In fact, there are some people who go on diets without really considering their baseline status and end up developing nutrient deficiencies because they were on the border for a certain nutrient at one point, but then due to their diet, they went below that level, and that could lead to problems down the line. So it's very important to think of these things when you think of nutrition as a way to or something that you're considering for improving your aging. Of course, I recognize that nutrition advice can be confusing, so you have to really tailor something that works for your needs, lifestyle, and other factors. So something that works for me may not work for you. So, these blanket diets or blanket statements that says this is great, might not necessarily work for you. And this at the molecular level and from a very scientific standpoint makes complete sense because we know that there's so much heterogeneity in the population that there absolutely cannot be a way that one thing that works for one person works for everybody else as well. So there has to be some level of customization, some level of tailoring, some level of personalization that needs to happen for nutrition. What about supplements? My biggest thing is you have to balance between safety and efficacy, and safety is of utmost importance when you're considering supplements. Some of the things that you can do as a consumer is to really read the label. So some of the things that you could look for would be the company, dates of manufacture, expiration, ingredients, both active and inert. If that information is not available, you can try to ask for those ingredients from the company. The other thing is you have to also pay attention to claims. So if something is claiming to, treat a disease or diagnose a disease, then it could be potentially problematic, especially if it doesn't have the data to back it up. And there are laws in place, and I'll talk about that in a second, to make sure that those claims, whatever the claims are backed by actual clinical trials or scientific evidence. There's a dietary supplements label database run by the NIH. You can go check it out. That helps with understanding some of the labeling requirements and things that you might be able to get out of it. It's very important that you do your own research. So just because you hear that this is something that you should be taking, just don't blindly get on it. It's very important you do your own research, talk to people, talk to your doctor, talk to other experts as well. There is a dietary supplement ingredient database run by the USDA where you could go check in, some of these ingredients as well. So I'm just trying to present some resources that you could use as you're sort of embarking on this journey, if that's what you're doing. And then some supplements may cross-react with drugs, leading to very severe side effects. And this is very important for older adults. So as we get older, we may develop conditions that require medication. So some of these medication can actually cross-react with supplements. So before you take on any new supplements, it's very important to understand whether it may have cross-reactivity with some of your current medication. And that can typically be done with your doctor, but there are also databases that are able to sort of check these cross-reactivities. And not all supplements work for everybody. Again, similar to nutrition, something that works for one person may not work for the other person. And as I said before, natural doesn't necessarily mean safe. So keeping your safety as your main goal is very important when you think of taking on any supplements. And then obviously speak with your doctor or provider before taking on any supplements. So one last thing about safety. So you might see that there are terms such as functional foods or nutraceuticals that are widely used in the marketplace. Such foods are regulated by the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. And I just want to say this is also very US centric, and there are similar governing bodies in the European Union and also other parts of the world as well. So in the US, the FDA regulates these functional foods and nutraceuticals, not under the same label as drugs, but under the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, or the FTC. So there's this idea that supplements are not regulated at all, but the truth is that they are, but it's subject to a different level of stringent protocols and regulation by organizations like the FDA. So the FDA, if you go to their website, you will also be able to look at their ingredient directory. That provides information about certain ingredients and whether there has been any warnings, recalls, and any activity related to those. So you'll be able to understand a little bit about the safety of some of these components if you do a little bit of spending time on the FDA database as well. So these are resources that are freely available to you. So do your due diligence and speak with experts. There are some supplements that could absolutely be beneficial for you, but it's very important to understand the safety and efficacy, whether it has scientific data backing it, whether there's potential for it, and whether you should actually be taking it given your current nutritional status and so on. So with that, I want to thank a few people. So this work actually started when I was a graduate student at University of Pittsburgh. So I want to thank my PhD mentor, Dr. Tom Kensler, and Kensler Lab members who are now, in many ways, my collaborators. I'd also like to thank my NIA IRP collaborators, where I did a lot of the earlier work related to aging. I would also like to thank my team at Health Surveil. So we specialize in technologies and products for environmental health and aging-associated diseases. So if anybody is interested in learning more, or interested in partnering with us or collaborating with us, please get in touch. I believe this QR code will take you to our website, so do get in touch with us. And if you are curious to get in touch with me, I also have my website here. So if you have contact me if you have any business inquiries, or you can also subscribe to my newsletter for updates on healthy aging and related topics. I do talk about supplements and nutrition related to older adults, but also looking at what happens through the lifespan as well. So the things that we need to be doing at different stages of our life in order to maintain health throughout our entire lives is one of the goals. So I do a variety of different things. So stay in touch, and like to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dushani, for the presentation. Very, very interesting. And personally, I've never heard of NRF2. So it's very rich for me to participate and to listen to what you had to say. So now we have question time. I have noted down a lot of questions myself, but if the participants have questions, I'll be happy to let them ask their questions and to have the answers. Okay, so I'm going to be
Hi.
the yes, okay. Sorry. Yes,
Sorry.
please.
Hi.
Please.
I have a question. Great talk. Thanks so much. I learned so much. And I look forward to your newsletter. But I also was wondering what your thoughts are on seed oils. I feel like there's a lot out there on how inflammatory they are, but I've also heard that debunked. Do you feel like based on your understanding of the research, it is best to use a certain type of oil or to avoid, certain oils? Yeah, so that's the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think, like you said, there's a mixed bag of evidence. So what I always say is when you look at scientific evidence, there are a couple of things that you want to look for. So rather than telling you the answer, I would say, how can you sort of navigate looking at the evidence? It's very important to look into who has funded the research because unfortunately nutrition is one of those fields where there are different funding sources, funding agencies that have different conflicts, may have different interests that fund research studies. So it's important to look at that. So for example, if there's a company that has funded research that's looking at a certain type of seed oil, then it is important to consider when you are looking at your body of evidence. And then the other thing is you also want to, put together the evidence together and look at what the evidence says as a whole. So that might be a little complicated and difficult to do because there might be so much evidence out there. But I think in general, like I said, nutrition is a very complex area. So there's, for every study that shows a positive benefit, there's 10 studies that show a negative benefit, which understandably confuses the general public. So I think it's very important to, stay up to date with the field, try to, keep up with what the latest research is, and in many ways evolve with the research. So I don't think I gave you a good answer,
No,
unfortunately.
that was great. That was helpful. And I'm sure any additional information you could provide in your newsletter would obviously be so helpful in this respect as, you research um and help evolve our understanding of this area for lay people, especially such as myself, who aren't as
Absolutely.
well versed in the science. Thank
Yeah.
you. This was so great.
Thank you.
Next question. Okay, so I'll just ask my questions and maybe jump to other people's questions after that. So I love how common food is just as great and strong as drugs, and in some situations, even stronger. And there's a common belief that what you eat is not that important and drugs are very important. So that's something that is obviously, from the financial point of view, very interesting for pharmaceutical companies. But reality is somehow more complex. And in some situations, just as you have outlined, some ingredients, some food types are going to provide very positive effects on our health in general and also health span. My question is, once you understand this, once you understand that the food you eat can really make a difference, how can you control these molecules? And I mean, just manage to take the right amount of them, and to arbitrate when there's too much of it, and also measure the effects it has in your body. Because here's the thing, most of the time you take nutraceuticals, you take multivitamins, and just as you said, but you just do it because you've heard that it's good for your health, but you don't measure, you don't have a measurement protocol, and you just do it, and in some time, and sometimes you take too much of it, and you end up having too much of that substance in your blood, and sometimes it's not enough. So Once we understand that the principle is there and what you eat makes a difference, how do you make sure that you take the right amount of those specific foods that you have just introduced in your presentation?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And I think the short answer is there isn't a good way for us to sort of regulate these molecules, right? So one example is, for example, so if I take the broccoli example, if you eat, raw broccoli versus broccoli sprout versus a different part of the broccoli plant, you will get very different amounts of sulforaphane. Okay. Um, so that in itself introduces a little bit of variety to how much of the compound you're getting. And then if you take cooked broccoli versus raw broccoli, then you get, so raw broccoli would give you a substantially higher amount of sulforaphane compared to cooked broccoli, because if you remember, the myrosinase is actually destroyed during the heating process. So there are a variety of different, conditions in nature that won't allow you to really take in like this standard amount. But in many ways, this is also the beauty of nutrition, right? So with supplementation, we sort of think, oh, this is going to give us getting a very standard dose, a controlled dose. We're able to take this amount and then, take it over the course of a certain time period, and we will get these benefits. But nutrition doesn't necessarily work like that. So if I sort of understand your question right, the question is, how do we control the amounts? How do we measure these amounts? Then with nutrition, it's very incredibly difficult to do. How do we measure these amounts? The answer to that is you will have to do a blood test, and there will be variability in that as well. So for example, I showed you in the urine, you can measure the metabolites of, let's say, sulforaphane as an example. You can measure those levels, but those experiments are incredibly expensive to do and tedious. Most people in the general population won't have access to it unless you're enrolled in a clinical trial or a study of that sort. Even then, it's very labor intensive, it's very expensive. So I don't foresee that becoming a thing. Which is also the problem that you sort of allude to, is then people end up taking supplements without really knowing what exactly they're taking in. In fact, I think several years ago, there was a newspaper, sort of an investigative journalist piece that showed that many of the supplements in the market don't really have the active ingredient that they claim to have, which is a huge problem, right? So in that case, people end up taking these supplements, not even, getting their money's worth. So there are a lot of problems in this area, but I don't really foresee measuring blood levels becoming a thing unless these technologies become very cheap somehow. I think right now, what seems to be happening is people take supplements and they pay attention to, like what exactly happens in their health. So there are some very simple biomarkers that you could sort of follow. I think in general, individuals are well aware of their health. For the people who are, who pay attention to their health, and people who like to try out different supplements, they know exactly what they are trying to solve. So they might, let's say, somebody is feeling lethargic and they want to try something that helps with the lethargy. What they would typically do is then you go on the supplement and see whether there's an improvement. So it's a perceived benefit in many ways because you're not objectively measuring it, but that in itself could, in some cases, be beneficial. So then what people would end up doing is then you continue it, talk about it, and then other people would take it, and then that helps you figure out what supplements work for you and what don't. So measuring in a laboratory setting or sort of measuring everything. I don't think it's going to happen unless you're a multimillionaire. And there are some multimillionaires, who are very interested in biohacking and aging who are doing this. But I think for the general person, it's not really feasible. So we'll have to wait and see, I think, how the field unfolds and, whether there are technologies where, with biological aging clocks is a big thing right now. There are a lot of efforts to make them cheaper. So you can do a clock, I think, for about $200-$300 now, which is still very expensive. But if it gets to a point where we are able to do these clocks for a very small amount of money, you can certainly incorporate that as a measurement tool to understand the effects of some of these interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. I guess one of the subsequent questions I have is, I mean, what you're saying is makes total sense. And one of the possible practical strategies to cope with it would be just to take supplements, because most of them are getting eliminated through urine if there's too much of it. But what are the side effects of too much NRF2 activation? Because you've talked about the positive effects, but are there any side effects that are undesirable?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question too. So NRF2 is one of these molecules that is thought to be, I mean, it's a very powerful molecule. In transient activations or short-term activation with dietary components, I don't think there are a lot of benefits a lot of negative outcomes that that could be problematic, because remember, there are ways of self-regulating the amount of NRF2 too, right? Because in a healthy person, you're not going to have just constitutive activation of NRF2, even if you're continuously taking in glucoraphanin or sulforaphane. There are ways to sort of taper the effect off. However, there has been some evidence, and we call this the dark side of NRF2, that in certain types of cancers, you see a hyperactivation of NRF2. So what seems to be happening is in certain disease conditions, NRF2 is actually upregulated. But rather than thinking of it as a way of NRF2 is activated due to due to a certain stimulus, I think what seems to be happening is that the NRF2 pathway is a pro-survival pathway, right? Because it allows the cell to protect itself. So what happens in situations like cancer or neurodegenerative disease is that the cells that are defected appear to be hijacking this pathway to their benefit. So that these, let's say in the case of cancer, the cancer cell uses NRF2 to live for longer because it's a pro-survival factor. So that has been observed, certainly. So NRF2 is upregulated in certain types of lung cancers. And this was very concerning when people started seeing this data, because then, it was the question that you asked, what happens if you activate NRF2 constitutively? Would you get cancer? But the answer to that is no. What happens is in disease conditions, there's a mechanism that sort of uses these cell protective pathways for the survival of these disease states, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big difference and dilemma between causality and correlation. So yeah, absolutely makes sense. Another question I had is, you've shown a slide where the body weight of older people goes down at some point or stabilizes. And I was surprised by this, and I wanted to elaborate a little bit on it to try to understand it. Can we suppose that the muscle mass decreases in older people, so that's why the overall weight of those people is going down, or eventually, as people get old, the very, very fat ones, overweight ones, sorry, it's more politically correct, they die because of subsequent, chronic diseases associated with their overweight. And so there's only the people who are somehow healthier and somehow in a more reasonable body weight that are still living, and we're doing the statistics over those people. I mean, I'm just trying to understand this phenomenon, which is intriguing to me. Why do older people lose weight?
Yeah, that's actually that's a good question. And I think we didn't look at lean mass in this data set, but it has been established in other studies that in individuals, as we get older, we do lose lean mass. So the lean to fat ratio is really the determining factor here, right? So as people get older, they lose lean muscle for a variety of different conditions, like sarcopenia, for example, which is age-related muscle loss. But also, dietary changes. We tend to eat less protein in some cases, like the example that I talked about. When you have problems chewing food, you're not able to chew meat. So some people might, get lesser amount of protein as a result of it as you get older. So a variety of different things leading to loss of muscle mass as you get older. That's definitely one. Um, but I think also the loss of body fat as you get older, or stable levels of body fat. But I think the driver here is really the loss of body weight. Sorry, the loss of body fat. That's a
Body
lean
muscle.
mass.
Yeah, yeah.
Lean muscle that's associated with this. But interesting point about high obesity levels and obese people or overweight people dying earlier. This was not really a good sample to assess that, because these people were generally very healthy older adults, healthy people. So it was not really a sample where we could look at overweight and obese people. There were some, but it wasn't necessarily, the best place to look at this. But I think what you say makes sense, because we know that obesity is a risk factor for a lot of different diseases and also early mortality. So there's certainly a possibility that you get sort of a survival effect and or survival bias, I guess, towards the end of this study. So the people in your 80s and 90s actually have, the sort of the optimal, the body weight or reduced levels of body weight. So yeah, I think it's a combination of two, perhaps other reasons as well that we haven't really explored.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Jason has one last question because you're running out of time. So Jason, you're going to be the last one. Make it a great question. Counting on you.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation, and we got really great info. One question I have, I can't say it's a great question, but something I was very curious about. I've heard of this too, where some supplements, people are selling these supplements that don't actually have the ingredients that they are even putting on the label. And I was curious, like, what your experience has been with that. I've heard there's been some testing, and I was just curious if there was a way, like, to easily determine that. Because I mean, some people, that you buy something, and I mean, my expectation is, like, if I'm buying it online, I'm kind of expecting that it has what it says it has. And you were inferring, and I've heard this before, that it may not. And people have tested, like, NMN. I think they ran this test, and it was like a lot of them didn't even have NMN in it. So I was curious what your experience has been with that, if there's any way to determine that, and how you go about kind of navigating that.
Yeah, so we were just talking about it before, and I also, I have seen studies and pieces talking about exactly what you talked about, where we think that we're taking in certain active ingredients, but when these studies or analyses were done by third parties, they find out that there's none of those active ingredients, which is a huge waste of money. It's a big problem. So I think people recognize this, which is a good first step. There are some companies that are very committed to providing third-party testing results. So that's something that I recommend. So obviously it costs more for the company to do it, which might drive the cost of the supplement a little higher. But really, if that is important to you and if it's worth the investment, then it makes sense for you to go with some of those companies that are selling third-party tested supplements. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's important to also, pay attention to the labels. So pay attention to what other people are saying about it. So just being very diligent, doing your due diligence, and also, doing your research, talking to other people, because there are a lot of communities, like there's a fitness community. There are people who are definitely taking that supplement. It's not just you. So I think it's important, given sort of the world that we live in right now, connecting with other individuals who might be taking this supplement, getting their feedback is also important. I think that is one way of making sure that we are getting our money's worth. And at least because you're not asking for a lot, you basically ask for the ingredient to be there, which is sort of the bare minimum. So I
Right.
think it's okay to demand that. And if there's any sign that if you have evidence that a company is selling something that it's selling something where the ingredient isn't there, or it has something else, or it is harmful, I think as a consumer, it's also your responsibility or our responsibility to bring it up, talk about it. I mean, we have so many different platforms now to share our experiences. I think we should collectively try to do our work as consumers as well, so that we demand better products, and then by doing that, we can actually receive better products, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I appreciate the info. And if you happen to come across any of these big companies that you have, determined that, it's I definitely would be interested, because I mean, yeah, as a consumer, it's like you think, wait, at least you're expecting it to be in there, whatever compound, whether it works or not, can be science and research. But if it's not even in there, at that point, it's like, fraud, basically. I mean, especially if they're knowingly selling a product like that, it says, hey, this is NMN, and really it's like a sugar powder or something, so yeah, I definitely agree. And I'll add you on LinkedIn too. Thanks for the info. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Gabriel, too.
Yeah, so Jason, I'm just thinking that there's maybe references and databases with companies who are constantly testing those supplements, or at least some of them. And I think I'm going to do some research and eventually share my conclusions with the rest of the IKARE Longevity community members. I think it's of huge value, and it would be very interesting for many of us. So yeah, thanks for the idea. I'm going to dive into it.
I agree. Yeah, keep me posted. I'd be very curious, especially if a big company is selling a product that doesn't have what they're saying in it. Yeah, that would be something we should look into.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone. Again, I'm going to publish and post the replay. And yeah, thank you very much, Dushani, for your expertise and for sharing all those very interesting things with us. See you guys. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you.